Welcome to Warriors Watch. I am Danny Leroux, your host, and so happy to have you with us for this episode. Wanted to talk about Warriors Spurs, and thought this was a decent one to show off kind of a solo podcast as a game recap for those of you who aren't familiar with Locked On Warriors, and also because I wanted to do something very specific, and that works better actually as a solo podcast than with somebody else because it's a very specific structure. And when I watch a game like this, early season, beginning of November isn't the same as it used to be, but it's still very early in the season. With a team like the Warriors, the question that I'm asking, and this is actually true if I'm covering just about anybody else, is what am I trying to learn and what did I learn? And the Warriors have a lot of continuity. They have a lot of players that are playing very similar roles. So what you're looking for is fundamentally different than a lot of other teams where you're trying to see how guys mesh together. You're trying to see who improved during the offseason. And those questions are still true with the Warriors. They're just not as relevant. And so there were two big things that I'm not going to necessarily say we learned them, but that we got more information on. One of them was Steve Kerr might have found a second unit. And so in this game, they turned to a pretty reliable group that serves a couple of different purposes. So what they did in the first quarter, and I think part of it in the third quarter was also that Durant was just going off, but Kerr went to a second unit of Patrick McGee, Klay Thompson, Andre Iguodala, Draymond Green until he got in foul trouble in the fourth quarter, and David West. And that group has a couple of merits in and of themselves. One, there are no bad defenders in that group, which is valuable, and you have Klay Thompson, who is who took a lot of shots during that stretch and is very comfortable doing that, and then a lot of good passers. So you don't really have that true initiator, the person who runs stuff, but that's not really what the Warriors do anyway. They do a lot of their offense through scheme and through player and ball movement. So that unit works well there, and I also like that it has a lot of willing shooters. Like when they tried Livingston there, I think one of the differences, and I was advocating for if they were going to go to that kind of a lineup to have McGee out there, is because you have to defend McGee out there. He's not going to take every shot, he's not going to make every shot, but he's comfortable doing it. Whereas with Livingston, everybody knows what he does well, and so that just constricted things for everybody else. So that's one big takeaway, and those groups did reasonably well in this game. David West ended up +1 because they had a little bit of a struggle in the second quarter, but then they did a nice job. And, they helped cut the lead both times. I thought they did a good job. And then the other element of it is that it allows the Warriors to play Curry and Durant together more. And that certainly can help both of those guys just because it takes away some of the defensive attention. And because I have been a little bit disappointed is probably a strong word. I've been not as impressed with Durant as the sole provider of offense, in that way. And he's a wonderful player, and he's, especially defensively, he's shown so much more in the regular season than he did in Oklahoma City. But he hasn't really thrived in that spot, and so I think separating them out makes it better for Durant. It allows him to get into an equilibrium, and I understand why Kerr went away from that both at the beginning of last year and the beginning of this year, because you want to see if they can fly on their own. And Curry, he's going to score his points. He's going to do what he's going to do. But with Durant, it helps. And also because you need more kind of with those other units. If you have Durant there, it's just a different, the support players are a little bit different. Also, I think that it's a little worse for Klay just because the ball's not popping in the same way. Durant still does have a little bit, especially in those lineups, of the me versus the world mentality. And you kind of want that if he's on the second unit, and I'm fine with them not using that at all. So that, I think, was one big takeaway, was going to that unit, going back to that unit, and them doing well. Another important note there is that Patrick McGee works so much better in that lineup than Nick Young, both because he can defend point guards and two guards, and because he isn't Nick Young. I mean, he can execute the scheme, and they can also, the big tweak that I would consider making in that group is using Caspi for either Green or Iguodala, depending on the circumstance, just to have another reliable shooter out there. I think that would put a lot more stress on the opposing defense. Obviously, he's not near the defender that they are, but it's something worth trying. But I think that fundamental group for the regular season does well, and it also aligns with the idea, which has basically become fact at this point, that the Warriors aren't going to use Draymond at center unless there's a crisis situation. And there was a crisis situation. They actually went to it early in the game because San Antonio went out to that huge run early, which the Warriors had already cut it to 9 by the end of the first quarter. So that was one big takeaway. I thought that the Warriors, that they've gone to this lineup, and I think it makes a lot of sense. It also puts Livingston in a better spot. I think it does all those things. The second one was unlike the Houston game, just because of where it took place in the season, being the home opener, being opening night, we got to see more of Patrick McGee and Jordan Bell against quality competition. Neither one of those guys would guard Kawhi Leonard, so you're not really worried about, how would that match up? If Kawhi was there, it'd be so much harder for them. And I thought both Bell and McGee looked good. Bell ended up not having a great shooting night, 1 for 4. I don't concern myself too much with that, but I thought he worked hard defensively, had a really nice contest. I didn't think he fouled Manu Ginobili. Ginobili thought he did, but Ginobili thinks that a lot. And just being around in the right places, had a couple of nice recognition on. There was an assist to Kevin Durant that I really liked where he had the ball in transition and he had already kind of double clutched and missed a layup earlier. So he just dumped it off to Durant. Durant got an easy dunk. And I thought the pacing on it and him recognizing it and making the pass at the right time was important because Bell could end up being the fifth guy. And actually, I'm going to talk about a third takeaway from this game. But he could end up being that fifth guy. And part of the importance of that, and we've actually seen this with McGee, who's gotten some minutes with the Warriors 4 All-Stars, is you need to know how to pick your spots and you need to know where the other guys are going to be at the right times. And Bell's still figuring it out. He's getting there. But I thought he did a nice job. And I also thought Patrick McGee really did embrace being a larger part of the offense during the time that he was out there. He was more aggressive with the ball in his hands. That wasn't necessarily taking a bunch of shots. He did end up 3 for 6 and 2 for 4 from 3. But just pressing the advantage when he had it and then moving the ball along if he didn't. And that's all they need from him, especially if he's with that second unit that plays with Draymond and Andre and Clay. If that's the way they're going to do it, you have a lot of guys there that can make good decisions, and David West facilitating from the post when you need it. McGee can still get a little bit more of that Ian Clark cutter in him. I think that would be very useful when you have that, but they don't have as much spacing in that group as you would like, so maybe you'd actually want one of the other guys cutting. But McGee didn't look like the moment was too big for him, which isn't a surprise considering he played in the clinch game of the NBA Finals. But I really like the composure and the way that both of those guys fit in a variety of different capacities, because McGee also played a little bit in the fourth quarter in a way that I thought was nice. And Bell, he's still bouncing around in the rotation. I did a conversation last night as related to a book signing with Marcus Thompson. Somebody asked us about when Bell's going to be the starting center. That's a little bit of a different question, but what I've liked about Bell is that he has succeeded in a variety of circumstances, and I think Kerr owes it to himself and to the team to try him out in more spots and just see where he works best. And there might be some areas where he struggles, and we'll have to see that too. And things always change with time. That's just the way this works. And so where are his strengths? Where are his weaknesses? And just getting him used to it and getting the reps. And that's the other reason why I think he could supplant JaVale McGee sooner rather than later. It's not like Kerr has a ton of trust in JaVale McGee other than the fact that he's going to try. He's going to work hard out there. And McGee played 7 minutes in this game. Bell played 12. Some of that was related to just how the game went. But in my opinion, other than just the burst sometimes that McGee has in finishing, and he has great hands as an alley-oop finisher, I think that by the end of the season, Bell is going to be not just a better version of JaVale McGee, but a more trustworthy version. And for a rookie, that's really impressive. And some of that also speaks to just the parts of JaVale McGee that you can't shave away. But then the other big takeaway for me from this game, which was muted a little bit by the third quarter, but especially in that first quarter, Zaza Pachulia looked absolutely awful. He wasn't really providing much on either end of the floor, partially because San Antonio's bigs, while they are big and they play LaMarcus and they play Pau Gasol, those guys can also space the floor. So you need a center out there who can really kind of occupy space and who can move from a spot to another spot. And so you're not spending as much time battling on the glass, though those guys can rebound when they're in position. It's kind of a different spot now with the Spurs as to what it used to be. And Pachulia really struggled defensively to kind of contain that. He was, the Warriors were outscored by 8 points in that first half of the first quarter in those 6 minutes. And Pachulia was a part of that. And the other big element that we're going to see just about every time against good teams is Pachulia struggling offensively and the rest of the team struggling offensively because the best of the best now know how to execute the game plan. And so a good representation of that is just the way that the offense flows. Like there was a time that caught my eye, and of course you can't tell all of this from television. It's not like I was sitting courtside or anything, where Draymond drove the lane and, they created a little bit of attention, and so he used that to feed Pachulia. And the Warriors ended up getting the call that it was off of somebody else. It looked to me pretty clearly like it was off Pachulia. And I think what Draymond, if I'm imputing what he was kind of his reaction to it, is that he was frustrated either that Pachulia just, you could think of it in the basic way, didn't make the play happen, or that he didn't execute it all the way, because his responsibilities offensively are so limited. It's set good screens, be in the right place at the right time, and then catch and finish when you have to. And if he can't do that, it's going to be a big, big problem for the Warriors, because then teams can help off him. That hurts the spacing. It adds often another capable defender. And so he did have 2 baskets in that first quarter, but they were both of that variety of the opposing team just focusing so much on stopping everybody else that he got a look when they were able to tuck it through. So to me, in terms of what we learned, those are the big 3 elements. Now, in terms of the story of the game, then you get into a lot of the other stuff. I mean, Durant struggled early, and something that became a focus for some people in the early going, and I actually went back and watched all the film, and they were completely right, was a weird scorekeeping anomaly in the first quarter of this game. So Durant was listed as being 0 for 6 from the field and having no turnovers. And that just looked wrong when you're watching the game. You go, that's not what happened. And what it seems like, from my opinion, and we'll see if the league changes this, they probably should, is there were a series of plays, definitely 2, and then there's a third, which is a toss-up. It was kind of in the motion in the same way, kind of like the question of whether it would have been a shooting foul or not if he'd been on it, or if it would have been on the floor, where he was stripped in the very early stages of going up. To me, especially if the ball's below the waist, that's not a block, that's a steal. And they counted all of those as blocks. And to some people, that's not going to matter, because, it was basically the ball was in your hands and then the ball was in San Antonio's hands. So the result's the same. But in terms of scoring efficiency and just in terms of calling a spade, it does matter. And so I think in an ideal world, they would shift at least 2, arguably 3 of those into turnovers, because that's really what they were. And that also affects, points off turnovers and all that kind of stuff. And that helped get San Antonio's offense going. Overall, in that first quarter, you had a couple different elements in play. One was, the Warriors were a little bit, they weren't as horrible offensively. They only had 4 turnovers, which I actually think should be 7. And they shot 40% from the field, which is, it's bad, but it's not horrendous out there. But San Antonio, not only in terms of the success rate of their shots, but in terms of the composition of their shots, was remarkable. And a lot of those looks were good. This is not just the situation of the Spurs, being a make-or-miss league and the Spurs just hitting all those shots. It was more complicated than that. And San Antonio, in that first quarter, 13 of 27, 6 of 13 from 3, meaning half of their shots almost and half of their makes almost were from 3. They actually shot almost exactly the same percentage and proportion from 2s and from 3s, and neither team got to the line. So you think about kind of where that is as a team, and then I'm sure a lot of people will focus on the offensive rebounding. In that stretch of time, San Antonio had 4 individually credited, and I think they had a 5th, which went off of a Warrior. So they had 5 offensive rebounds on only 14 missed shots. That's a big, big problem sometimes. But the Warriors were able to come back from it in a couple of different ways. So then when you look at basically the rest of the game after that first quarter, which felt in many ways like an anomaly, it does look more like the ridiculousness that the Warriors have thrown for the rest of the season. So 55.7% shooting from the field. That is ridiculous, but that's not too far off what the Warriors have done this year. 10 of 20 from 3. Yeah, 50% is a little bit high, but shooting 23s and 3/4, they can easily do that. They could get 30 points from 3s in that period of time, no problem. And then the other interesting one was that the Warriors did get to the line 12 times and made 10 of those. The only misses being Draymond missed 1 and McGee missed 1. But San Antonio got there 22 times. It was 16 to 22. That was really how they stayed in it for a little while, but then it still got completely out of hand late. And so what I didn't learn from this game, because we already knew it, is that when the Warriors are on, they can beat pretty good teams. And San Antonio, early in the year, there was this, oh my God, they're winning all these games with Kawhi Leonard. They're not that they're not missing a beat, because they certainly were different, but like they beat Minnesota in their opener and all these other games. What we realized in this is that the Spurs need Kawhi Leonard as a creator against the team as talented as the Warriors, and that's not a surprise in any way, shape, or form. So you kind of wonder, well, where do you go from here? And that depends a lot on the players, because this game, I didn't see the failings in the first quarter as much on a lack of focus or a lack of intensity, though the defense certainly could have been better. It was more a kind of a best case and a worst case in those minutes where San Antonio was hitting a lot of shots, hitting some shots they don't usually make, and the Warriors were missing more than they usually do. So when you have those two things going together, you expect what's typically called regression to the mean to take place. You expect the unusual success and the unusual failure to go back towards each other, and that's exactly what happened. They actually fully reversed in this game. The Warriors were very good, and the Spurs were not after that, and they weren't as crisp. They turned the ball over 12 times. A lot of those were forced. And also, something that ended up being kind of big in this game is that of those 12 turnovers in the final three quarters, 7 of them were live ball. They were steals. And so that allowed the Warriors to get more in fast break. Actually, in fast break points, I've had my issues with the way the NBA credits it, but it was 18-2 in that last section in it's not the competitive portion of this game because the game went in so many different directions. But if the Warriors can do that, if they can generate turnovers more or even close to the same level that they're giving them up, they are the best transition team in the league. So then that takes away or negates an advantage that the other team has. And if you kind of balance that out, then you make it more of a, and even in a situation like this where the Spurs don't run you as much, if you can make it a half-court game, and people lose sight of this, if you make it a half-court game, the Warriors are going to do pretty well. And that is really what the turnover battle is about. And if you take away that easy way for the other team to get offense, and I thought the Warriors' defense, particularly in that second half, was better, was sharper than it had been for a lot of portions. Not everything, because they had a nice stretch against the Wizards. They had actually, a nice stretch against the Raptors in that game where the Raptors were just settling for their normal crap. And the Warriors their defense, it's very possible it doesn't end up being, number 1 or number 2 in the league. But what we've already seen is that the fastball is in there. It's not, I don't think it's going to be as ever present, particularly as it was the 73-9 year. But that's the only thing that we had to learn in terms of the defense, and we did. And so what I want to see moving forward is what becomes stable in terms of the rotation and what is still in question. So we really haven't seen Kerr meddle too much with the center rotation other than flip-flopping JaVale McGee and Jordan Bell a little bit, particularly because Kerr doesn't trust JaVale in pick and roll, which I completely understand. That is one big thing is are they going to start fiddling there, because that's the only place they haven't yet. And I have the running joke about how David West isn't allowed to play in the first and third quarter. I definitely think they should consider that too. A couple different places where he might work. And then how do they want to handle trying other people out in the spots that they've kind of already hollowed out? So you have Sean Livingston, who has gone back to the role, which I still think he's most comfortable in, particularly in last year's playoffs, playing more with Curry than without Curry. But my little pet theory is that while Livingston is much better in that role than his role in the second unit, that might be the place for Patrick McGee to be as soon as next year, maybe even this year, that he fits that spot better because you have to defend. The same reason he works better on the second unit. And so then that question becomes, could McGee do both of those? And I think that's a little bit of a problem because that's a lot of minutes and it's a lot of consecutive minutes. So maybe you want to kind of intermix those two, and then you have the personal dynamics that are there. But then the other big question is with that, and this is where I was leading originally, is what about the guys who aren't in the rotation right now? And I'm sure a lot of people are thinking that in terms of Nick Young. Certainly deserves a chance, especially against the right opponents, to show what he can do. There is a value that, as we're seeing with Klay Thompson, of having a guy who is willing to take those shots. And if they can prove it by having McGee out there defensively, that they can defend without one of Green or Iguodala, if they can pull one of those two guys and swap them for Nick Young, then you have a much more balanced lineup. And it's possible that unit just falls off a cliff defensively, especially if it's Nick Young, because it gives the opponent a much better place to attack. And that's why I want to see what Omri Caspi can do there. I'm a proponent for him. Those of you who know my work know that I've been arguing for Caspi to be on the Warriors for about a year now, and we've seen why in the limited minutes he's played. And so it's not like this is broken and Kerr has to find a solution or else this team is in trouble. But that is still what the regular season, especially what the early part of the regular season, is about. So I want to see if he's really willing to put the pedal to the metal and try some of these things out, go with some different rotations. They have, experimented with the second unit, stuff like with Livingston, but there are bigger things they can try that they're kind of treating as a given right now, and maybe they want to give those an opportunity. And some of that might come, and I fully expect this to be the case, when they have back-to-backs and when they have these more arduous stretches in terms of frequency, which are more rare in the current NBA thanks to starting the season a little bit earlier, but they do still happen. They're going to have some nasty back-to-backs. They're going to have some 3-and-4s. And so at those moments, trying out some of these guys will be relevant. And also when they do tactical rest, when they do that. But particularly when it comes to McGee, when I was talking about where you want to play him, and to a lesser extent with Jordan Bell, you don't really want to see them in some of these more slapdash lineups. You want to see what they can do with the best against the best, because those guys are probably going to need to be a part of the rotation in a big way sooner and later. Because eventually the center rotation is going to change a lot, because all those guys other than Bell are free agents. And with McGee, at some point, Sean Livingston's not going to be the player he was. That point might already be now. And so you need to know what he is. Is he a Livingston replacement? Is he an Iguodala replacement? Is he both? Is he neither? Because you are somewhat subject to the idea of supply. With the high-level guys, I advocated, for those of you who read it on The Athletic, for the Warriors to decline the options for Kevon Looney and for Damian Jones. They ended up doing one of the two, partially because they can do better with a minimum roster spot. And so when you're looking for talented guys for the minimum, or even for the mid-level exception like Nick Young, it's really about who says yes. But how that matters is in terms of what they do in the draft. And the Warriors are looking for a specific type of player, and you can make an argument that it doesn't matter. But having that idea really does make it easier for Bob Myers and everybody else to figure out what they want the rest of the way, and also to make sure that you're not making false promises to these guys. I haven't talked to Nick Young. I don't know if he'd even say publicly whether he is okay with the idea that he's basically been marginalized at this point in the season. Coach Kerr talked after the game. I think Anthony Slater asked him basically if McGee has basically earned that spot, and he said yes, for now, and nothing's permanent. But he has, and so is Nick Young okay with that? And you get the strength in numbers ethos. You get all that stuff with Kerr, and it is a part of why they get so many high-level free agents, is that guys feel like they're going to have the chance to play, that they're a part of this team and this organization that has been a positive experience for a lot of players now. They can, they have more who are spreading the gospel at this point. But that doesn't mean each individual player is going to be happy in their spot. And so how they handle that is going to be a different kind of challenge, not only in terms of those specific players, Nick Young and maybe JaVale McGee could be in that role, but also how that affects the willingness of other players to do those spots in the future. Because it's a little bit different for McGee, thanks to the fact that he tried to get something bigger and really couldn't. I mean, I think the Warriors' offer was at least close to the best thing on the table at that point. But with Nick Young, he took less money, obviously took less in terms of years because he only got one. So that it's not going to be a challenge because players are going to do it, but maybe you want to look for something different so you don't have to say, oh, you're going to be a part of this rotation, or maybe you just have to say we're not going to be able to make those promises anymore. And so both of those things are possible. It'll be a challenge for everybody to figure out exactly where they're going with this. But the fortunate thing for the Warriors, well, there are many fortunate things for the Warriors, but a big one is they have time, plus they have a backstop, because they're not trying to figure this out with the season on the line. This is not a situation like Dallas, who I believe is 1-7 and really has to, they have to figure out what's going on in their rotation, or they're going to be talking more about next season and moving forward. The Warriors are really, really good. They now, after this game, are tied for the best record in the Western Conference, and by and large, they haven't played particularly well in these 9 games. So you have a lot that you can take from that. I mean, the fact that they're going to do that, and it's not like this was some sort of cupcake schedule. They played Houston, they played San Antonio, they played Washington, they played Toronto, and so all of those teams are talented. A lot of those teams have some serious continuity, especially Washington and Toronto, though they did get both those games at home. So you don't want to get too overboard of, oh, they're locked in, they're going to beat everybody, or they're going to do anything like that. But if they stay healthy, they're in the driver's seat, especially considering how Cleveland has been sputtering. If people are interested in that, A, we're going to talk about it on Dunked On, and B, I'm happy to do something on the Cavs and Warriors watch, because a benefit of watching the entire league is that I can talk about all of these teams cogently, and the Cavs' transition defense, their half-court defense, their help defense have all been big problems. So that doesn't mean those are problems are going to be there forever, just like the Warriors' problems haven't been there forever, but it is worth watching where that goes from here. So that's enough rambling of that sort for this. It was fun to kind of put my thoughts together, to look at the splits and to look at where this is going. And I want to go in a couple different directions for the next couple Warriors watches. I will do, a game of the week or something like that when they come up. I'm not probably going to do something on the Nuggets game on Saturday, though I do love the Nuggets. If it's great, then I'll pull something up. But other than that, probably won't. But something I might want to do is kind of walking through the logic of columns. And so I'm actually working on one right now on a similar vein to this, but it's more in the big picture in terms of, takeaways and what questions still need to be answered. And so one thing I might do with this, if people are interested, is, and this is actually a benefit since I'm writing my Warrior stuff for a pay site, is doing a more like an annotated version of the pieces about where I was going, what research I did, and where I'm going, and like basically what it means. And so that's something I'd like to do for Warriors Watch moving forward. If that's something you're interested in, your feedback is always so important to me. Danny Leroux, NBA @gmail.com. @Danny Leroux on Twitter. Email is way better because you can write as much or as little as you want, and it sticks in my inbox. Twitter is so ephemeral, even with DMs, that it can be a challenge in that way for true feedback. So check that. Just if you have a strong opinion, I do appreciate it. Those of you who listen to Locked On Warriors know that I incorporated that a lot. Also, if people want more mailbags, if people want more guests, let me know. Whatever makes you happy. And you should definitely also, to support the show, leave a rating, leave a review, spread the word, however you see fit. Really do appreciate it. How many listeners this has and how well it does, whether we get advertisers, is going to affect how often I do it. I do have a passion for talking about this team, but I also am busy, especially with the book. So you can check that out. And the other thing you can do is subscribe, download every episode. That's a really big help. And you can check out CLNS Media, who is my partner with this show. They do a lot of awesome stuff. They have Real Jam Radio, but they also have Sam Vecini's Game Theory Pod, B-Ball Breakdown, so many other great things going on right now. So you can check that out. You can even use their, I think it's still the CLNS Radio app. I'm not sure if they're going to change the name, but you can check it out there. This podcast and so many others. You can, if you want to, you can use that as your podcast player. And when we get sponsors, you can read those too. And then to support me, you can read my writing wherever it comes up. Usually Sporting News, Real GM, The Athletic for all my Warriors work. And you can check out my book, 100 Things Warriors Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. Out with Triumph Books. Did a book signing last night. Was awesome in Oakland. We'll be doing more book signings, getting close to announcing another one. There will be one in, I think it's 2 weeks. And then going to probably have them spread out a little bit between now and the holidays, because I really see that as one window for the book. It's like people buying it before, not that everybody celebrates Christmas, but it is big from a capitalism standpoint before then. So if you want to, you can check it out. And I'm going to do some stuff with signed copies. There was also a kind of a contest of sorts with The Athletic recently. But that's enough for now. I'm going to watch the end of Lakers Blazers, which most of you will have, if you're watching it, will have already watched by the time you listen to this. But thank you so much for listening. Take care and make it a great day.